How's everything been with the quarantine and stuff? Has it been okay or?
Yeah, I think it's tough for everybody. Yeah? I mean, and with all the bars closed, restaurants closed, so the restaurants are going to open up again in in June, beginning of June. The bars we don't know yet,
Hmm.
so it's going to stay tough. I think we sell about 80% of our sales goes to bars,
Hmm.
directly or indirectly. So that's been quite tough. Restructuring a bit the company to make sure that we don't have too much overhead cost at the moment, and
Sure.
being trying to pay the bills.
Yeah.
That's what's going on at the moment.
Sure. Um, so now that there's a few people in here, guys, if you have any questions, there's like a little question box you can click on at the bottom of the screen. You should be able to see it. And then if you just type your question in there, that way we can pop it up and display it so everybody can see it. And until then, we'll just sort of chat and see what's going on. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, Garrett, have you found some extra time to do any projects or anything, or has it still been pretty business as usual?
I I planned on doing a lot of things in this. I thought, okay, now with the Corona crisis, I'm going to have a lot of time to think about other projects. The thing is, we've launched a project that we wanted to launch already for a while, and that's our web shop. And the web shop went live about 2 weeks ago. And since the web shop went live, I have no time anymore.
I saw the
So the
picture.
web shop.
I saw the picture online of all the cases that needed to be sent out, all the boxes,
Yeah,
and
I mean, people are really helping us. They're buying the beer to drink at home. They cannot go to the bars to drink it, so they buy it to drink at home. And they're helping us because thanks to the web shop, we're going to be able to survive the crisis. But it's a lot of work, and we are reorganizing. Now we're packaging beers per bottle, per box, instead of before we were shipping mostly pallets or
sure,
half pallets or mixed pallets. So
yeah.
it's a complete other organization. We have the kids running around there. So I mean, it's just me, my wife, and the kids all there because we cannot have other people running around with the kids.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's been quite challenging these days just because it's a complete new thing. Um, and okay, there's a learning curve to this. So step by step we're learning, and
Sure.
that's, I mean, it's a very positive thing. It's helping us to move forward.
Yeah, I bet. Um, have you? I mean, I know this has been asked a few times already, and I'll just pop it up here from David about the status of the cafe. Have you made any progress? I know when we were there in January, you were still sort of in construction mode and restoration mode.
Well, I was telling everybody that visited us in beginning of the year that we would open up the second half of the year. What surprises me is that during COVID, when all the bars are closed, people still ask me when we're going to open. I have no idea anymore when we're going to open because now by law we are it's forbidden to open bars, but as well, we have so few revenue at the moment that we have difficulties investing in the project. And
Yeah,
I mean, the workers cannot come to do their job and everything because they cannot keep their distances for the construction workers. I mean,
yeah,
so we're definitely going to open. I mean, it's one of the goals I want to achieve with the brewery. We're going to open the bar, and I'm sure once it's going to be open, it's going to be very fun. It's going to be a very nice place for people to share a bottle and to enjoy Lambic beers.
sure.
I just don't know when. It will really depend on when bars are going to be allowed to open and when, for us, the economical side is going a bit better, that we can afford to invest in the beer house, because we bought the building like 2 years ago or something, because it's all attached. All these buildings are attached one to another because it was all part of the original brewery. And now we are doing the renovations inside, and afterwards we need to install all the equipment. But that's costing also a lot of money. So
Yeah.
installing the equipment and doing some of the renovations we've postponed for now, and we'll see once it clears up. We'll decide how to go forward. But we still want to open the beer house, and I'm sure it's going to be very fun. So, I mean, that's one of the projects for the future that we definitely will do.
Yeah.
But it can be that we open still this year. It can also be that we open the first half of next year.
It's a long wait for such a big project, huh? I know it's been a long time coming, a lot of work, but.
Yeah, but I mean, everything that we do with Lambic beers, it takes a lot of time. And the whole project, I started it with Oud Beersel in 2003 on the project, launched the brewery only at the end of 2005 again. And then everything to get a Goes on the market, that was 2007. So we have the orchard, and people saying...
That's what I'm drinking right now, is it 2007?
Okay, go. Big bottles.
Yeah.
Go. With the old labels, then we used the old labels. There was still a stock of old labels at the brewery, so we used these old labels before we had our own logo, the shield that has gone through its transformations as well. But initially, we just started with the old labels that were still available in the brewery. Yeah. There was no beer left, but we still had old labels left. So.
Yeah, I've got, I think I have a few more of these ones left, a few more Outer Creek with those old labels on them. I love those old labels, though.
Yeah, they're looking cool. Thing is, when we started, my designer also said, I mean, it's great on the label, but you cannot use this as a logo on anything else. It's quite hard to use. And so once we started with the shield logo, it really helped us to develop our marketing. We're doing a lot of, I have an Italian graphical artist. So just with my connection to Italy as well, we speak in Italian together. That makes things a bit more fun. But it gives another perspective, another kind of design to the beer labels and everything as well.
Well, speaking of updating things, there's another question about future experimental blends. Anything that you want to do or that might be coming soon that we can know about?
We have our basement -1. We have all these barrels of Portwood whiskey, Madeira, port wine, Ruby Port. So we're going to bottle these beers one day or another. We have, I mean, it's not in blends, the experiments, because, I mean, with Lambic it's always a blend, or we take it just from one barrel, but then it's not a blend of a special Goes. What we have of a special Goes, for example, we're going to release around summer the Oude Pijpen 2020 edition. So we released the Oude Goes, Oude Pijpen back in 2017, and that's a blend of only old barrels of 650 liters, old port barrels that have been used for Lambic beer between 60 and 120 years, and a selection of these barrels, about 20 of these barrels, go into a batch, and then we make an old style Goes out of this.
And that's only
normally for our...
So that's only in small bottles, right?
That's only in small bottles, right?
Yeah. Any thoughts on bigger bottles for those, or even like magnums of Goes or anything? Or
we don't make so many products anymore on big bottles. We do our Goes and our Creek standard on big bottles. We do our green walnut on the big bottles. I have some big bottles here. So we have the green walnut on the big bottle, which is our Lambic of 1 year olds that we put on tank afterwards with green walnuts that we pick in July. We leave them on during 10 months and then filter out the walnuts and blend in with other Lambic and re-ferment on bottle. This one, can you see this one?
Yeah.
That's the
For the Scarbex,
The
yeah.
Starbix Oude Creek 2020 that has not been released yet. So we're going to release this in summertime as well. So this is on big bottles, and we have our Bizarre range. So our championized Lambic beers, and these are on big bottles as well. But all the other specials, we mainly release them on small bottles for now, because we want these products to be available for everybody, and we want to sometimes as well have them in bars. And if you these big bottles, not a lot of bars can carry the big bottles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's tough to order a big bottle at a bar or a restaurant and then have to, one,
yeah.
pay for it because they're really expensive, and two, drink it all or share it, and then you end up with the amount of a small bottle anyhow.
You always need to share them, these kind of bottles,
Yeah.
or I mean, and then you need to find the person that wants to drink it with you, and
Sure.
it's a habit of the past, and it's I really like it, the big bottles, and mainly when I drink Gozer Creek in the brewery, we always open big bottles because we share the bottle.
Sure.
But I can understand in bars it's different, because I mean you need to serve by glass or by a small bottle to the consumer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But okay, it can be that we are going to fill some special blends in the future on small volumes, and then maybe it can be big bottles or small bottles. That's not decided yet.
Yeah. You've talked a little bit about it before, your history of sort of coming into Oud Beersel and sort of taking it over and reviving the brand and anything. So I think this is a really good question here. It's, what do you think will be most important for the continued success of Lambic as a style?
In general, that is, not for Oud Beersel.
Yeah, just in general. I mean, the Lambic scene has obviously exploded in the last decade or so from what it used to be, particularly from the 90s and the early 2000s. And you've really just been a part of that. You've sort of come up with it at this point. What do you see as important now?
Well, I think innovation is important. It's always been important for any type of company. So I think innovation in Lambic beers need to be is necessary. You can innovate in technology to produce the beer. You can innovate in the finishing of the beer, in the packaging of the beer. You can innovate in a lot of things, but I think innovation is necessary. If we look back, a lot of people talk like, wow, the Goes of 40 years or 50 years ago, that was amazing. Nobody wants to drink Goes of 40, 50 years ago anymore. Because our flavors have changed as well. The products, the beers that we have in general, I'm not talking about Lambic beer, but the regular beers, they're more refined than the beers that were made 40, 50 years ago.
Sure.
Because now we all use stainless steel. So Lambic has to evolve with the technology to be accepted by, I wouldn't say the general beer consumer, because not everybody is going to drink Lambic beers, but we always need to have top quality. I mean, the whole sector of Lambic beer, we are known for such special style, such a unique style, and a lot of people at home or breweries have tried something similar. But if you look in average, Lambic beers are always at least one step ahead in quality and in stability of the beers. And I think that's very important for the beers. We need to have the innovation in both the quality and new products on the market without going too commercial. We need to keep our traditions at the same time, but that doesn't mean, like, we have the green walnut. It's kind of a Goes. It's a blend of different lambics. We don't call that another Goes because there are walnuts in there. But that's something special, something unique.
Sure.
Even for a regular beer, walnuts are not used that much.
When the green walnut came out for the first time, was it 2015, 2016 or so, I think?
15, I think, yeah.
I ended up buying a case or 2 cases of it when it first came out. I think I have 1 or 2 bottles left of that original batch, but it's always just been one of my favorite favorite lambics. It was so soft when it came out. It was so fruity, but there was really no acidity to it whatsoever. It was just so perfectly balanced on that. But you talked about maybe nobody wants to drink a 40-year-old goose or a 30-year-old goose anymore because it's so different. But there is a good question just for yourself or for the brewery. Do you end up keeping some blends and vintages of all your beers that you make in the cellar, just to either
Yeah.
release for later or just to check in on? And
We have bottles of every batch that we have ever produced, because it's an obligation by law, first of all. We put a best before date of 20 years on the bottles, so we need to keep proof that the beer is still good for consumption
sure.
in that best before date. So we always have bottles of every batch, and we put some more aside than we would need actually, so we can once in a while pop open a bottle and see how it evolves. But in general, I mostly drink just the goes that we're selling at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I'm going to drink a goose of 3 years old and then I'm selling a goose that I'm selling the goose that has been bottled 6 months before.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm drinking what the consumer.
How long do you leave the batches like in the warm room to re-ferment and in condition before you put them out into distribution?
It depends a bit. It depends a bit on how we are with the stock, of course, in the market, and when the warm room needs to be emptied as well. Some batches go out from the warm room after 2-3 months. Other batches stay in 6 months in the warm room.
Mm-hmm. What about in terms of, there's another good question here. Why don't we see lambic collaborations between other Belgian lambic breweries or blenders? Apart from,
blenders,
apart from
in general
Mega
are
Blend.
already. Yeah, that's the only one, huh? Blenders wasn't there? I think there were maybe some in the past, like was the Millennium Goose not a collaboration?
With the Com, yeah.
Yeah. It's quite rare, but then there's a Lambic breweries that's so common in other breweries. I mean, Lambic brewers, they Lambic blenders, so they're already. Yeah, I think it's maybe also to do with the past. If you look, because you're calling from the US, I'm from Belgium. Belgium is a more traditional beer market, but the beer goes back from the 1300s, but the history of the people producing the beer and everything goes back a long time as well.
Yeah.
And so if you look at Lambic beers, the positioning of Goose and Creek now on the market, it's completely different as before. Why? Because before a bar, they only had Goose or Creek written on their menu. And so if as a brewer you wanted to have your beer sold in that bar, you had to convince the owner of the bar to throw out the other brewery that supplied the Goose and the Creek. So there were always a lot of situations between breweries that you stole my best customer from me, and so this even to look at Oud Beersel, for example, the beer house was managed by the sister of the old brewmaster, Harry van der Velde, and Harry van der Velde wasn't the easiest, and so he had a lot of problem. At the moment decided to stop selling, and she started selling the goes of Winderix in the bar of Oud Beersel. But nobody knew in the past. Why? Because the bottles had chalk stripes. So you had a white chalk stripe for Goose, a red for Creek, and there was one brewery supplying it or the other brewery supplying it. A regular customer did not see the difference. They were just ordering a Goose or a Creek. And the stability in between batches was not that amazing in the past. It has been improved a lot over the years.
Sure.
So the whole thing, yeah, the situation in the past, people that we still have the heritage. I felt that with Henri van der Velden, it was like there was something going on between that brewery and between that brewery, and it was passed on from generation to generation as well.
Yeah.
So when I went to the States, I see people going, one brewer from one brewery, they go into the other brewery, they go in their barrel room, they taste from the beers in the barrel room, all these kind of things. And yeah, it's another atmosphere, another spirit, I think. But yeah.
Have you ever heard the story? I'd have to look it up. I think it was with the De Trock family about one of the early blenders or brewers at De Trock, who was also a mayor. They were having a huge fight in town, and it was a big to do. Someone tried to, I don't know, commit some crime. It was just crazy. Some of the old stories from these small villages with Lambic brewers and blenders who end up becoming mayors of villages or small towns and things like that.
I don't think it was only limited to Lambic brewers or blenders. I think in Belgium, most of the time the brewer was the mayor.
Sure.
That was in the past. We had that in Beersel. The mayor was a brewer. And I think you had that in a lot of communes and cities, that the mayor, because I mean, that's the person that was in contact with so many people, and everybody went to church, and after church, everybody went to the bar, or they never went to church and they immediately went to the bar, but in the end, they were all drinking beer. That was for sure. So the brewer was a very important person that everybody knew.
So can we expect you to step down from the presidency of Horal and then just become the mayor of Beersel here soon?
I'm not a politician, so it's not my ambition. I'm president of the Association of Entrepreneurs in Beersel, for example. And so I have a lot of contact with the politicians of Beersel to defend the interests of the entrepreneurs, but that's for me as far as I would
go. There's another question here. Do you have a Guz with any 4-year-old components in it, or would you like to make one that has that sort of age?
I was just thirsty, because my glass is empty, so I wanted to reach out for a beer. But with that question, I can answer you. I can show you this one. That's the Fooder 21, Oud Beersel Barrel Selection Fooder 21. It has 50% of Lambic there. So it's a batch of 80 hectoliters called Lambic 1 that on the fooder. These fooders were used for white sweet wine in the past to make vinegar afterwards from it. And we have 6 of these fooders, but the 21 has the most pronounced character. So we blended in Lambic, 3-year-old Lambic, 30 hectoliters of a similar fooder. And then we blended in another 10 hectoliters of 1-year-old Lambic, also from a similar fooder. So it's a batch that we released last year around Tour de Gueuse, and it's very unique, very expressive in flavor, but not in acidity, just in a unique flavor from the barrels.
Good.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. I got to fill my glass up here too in a second because I'm almost out. But there's a question in the comments, and I think it's a really good one, but sorry I can't display it more because it didn't come in through the box. But it's hanging out there.
I love the display that you do there. Full technology.
It says, can you explain how Mertz is produced and how it's traditionally used?
Well, you have 2 ways of producing the Mertz, but Mertz was traditionally used to blend Lambic with lower ABV beer, because you have to know that now Lambic should have a gravity of at least 12.7 degree Plato. So that's why you don't find an Oud Beersel that is like 4 degrees, 4% ABV or something. But Mertz is actually when you put the water on the grains, you have the extract from the grains. After a while, you don't have enough sugar coming out of the grains anymore. So then you stop with the washing of the grains. Mertz is actually when you stop there, that's the part that's going to go to the lambic, and when you continue, and then you have a very watery solution, that's actually Mertz.
Mm-hmm.
And the beer made from that was actually used to blend in to make a faro or a creek or something like that, just to make lambic beers lower in ABV. Mertz is actually not commercialized in Belgium. There are not a lot of breweries even that make Mertz. And I think now when breweries make Mertz, they make a whole batch of Mertz. They do not wash out the spent grains at the end because besides the remaining sugar contents, you also have some negative flavors that are coming out.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's more a quality thing now than before, I think.
Another good question here from Jerry over at Bottle Conditioned. Do you have plans to brew on your own again here in the future?
We have plans, but nothing is concrete. Let's say that, I mean, for me, I started to safeguard Lambic beers and Oud Beersel, and we had a big project, and we've done already a lot of projects. We've realized, for example, the cherry orchard in the back with the Schaerbeeksig cherries. Now the next thing that is coming up is the beer house. I want the beer house to work properly, and then I hope the beer house will generate some cash that we can invest in production. We've already acquired the house of the old brewmaster. So Henri, he passed away 3 years ago, and so in 2005, when I bought the brewery from him, I had an option on his house. So we lifted the option when he passed away. So it takes a lot of time because he was 77 when I acquired the house, and he passed away at the age of 91. So we always envisioned that when we had his house, we could expand a bit more and maybe put a brew house. So now we have the building. The only problem is that we acquired 6 months before his building, we acquired the building of the beer house. And that's a lot of money going into buildings that we have no revenue from.
Sure.
So first we need to make sure that the beer house is running, that we get some money in there, and then with that money we're going to invest in the production facility. Now we've been working with universities already like since 6 years or something. We've analyzed lambic beer on DNA level to see what's going on at what phase of fermentation. So we've analyzed during 3 years the whole evolution of all organisms that are existing in lambic and what's going on, what's happening, even about new brewing methods and everything for producing lambic beer. So we have the knowledge, the theoretical knowledge about this. So because we want to make lambic beer with new equipment, but okay, step by step. But this is coming, but this is not our top priority, I think. First the beer house, and we'll start releasing some of these special barrels with like the whiskey aged lambics and everything, and do the smaller volume releases on bottle. I think that's first for us the way forward, and then once we're out of the crisis and once we're able to invest, we're going to definitely invest.
Sure.
But it's not the aim neither to become a big production facility. That's not our aim. We don't want to become too big. We're a small company, and I like it to stay quite small, manageable, let's say, but
Sure.
It has to be fun and enjoyable.
I want to jump back real quick to collaborations. because I think you're the only Lambic producer right now working with American brewers on a regular basis, at least, to
Yeah,
do.
we work with Belgium for the transatlantic, but that's about the only American that we're working with. We work with a couple of others. We work with Lindheim, a very, very small one in Norway, and even with Lervik in Norway as well. We work with we used to work with Birrificio del Ducato in the past on the Beersel morning, and we worked even with Cadelbrado. I don't know if you know these guys from north of Italy near Bologna, Cadelbrado. They started like 3-4 years ago, make some nice beers. Yeah, we work. We like collaborating, but not extensively. I mean, if we collaborate with the brewery, we want to assure ourselves that they have the right mindset on what is lambic and on the protection of lambic, and they do not want to abuse the naming of lambic on other beers and these kind of things. I mean, if it's just to have our image on their bottles and then say that they're making lambic beers as well, that's not the point.
Do
We only
you
collaborate with the ones that respect.
do you get a lot of requests for different collaborations and brews, or requests for, say, wort or lambic to blend into their own beers?
How we get some requests, we don't all the time because we sometimes just block the request. If we don't know the brewery, I want to first know the brewery. It's not just like a cold sale of lambic. That's not what we're up to. We want to assure ourselves that the brewery that works with us, first of all, know what lambic is, because some think, okay, we get some lambic and we put it in our beer and then we bottle it and we put it on the market, and then 2 weeks after all their cans explode. So
Sure.
that's not something that what we want to help with.
Yeah.
And I mean, it depends on the brewery. It doesn't matter. The image. We're not looking ourselves for like the most hype breweries and everything, because we're not a hype brewery neither. I've always tried to keep my feet on the ground
Yeah.
and build up the company step by step with a view for the future generations. It's not for the next 5 years. It's for the next generations that I'm building up the brewery. So.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting way to look at some things too, because my first tour de gueuze was 2013. It's the first time I'd gone to tour de gueuze. My first visit to Brussels was in 2007 when I lived in northern France. I was a student there, and so I came to Brussels a few times when I lived there. And the scene in Brussels, and I mean the scene in Lille where I lived in 2007, was dead. There was nothing there. Craft beer didn't even exist yet. Craft beer hadn't hit Europe at all. But now, I think even in Brussels, particularly in Brussels, there's a huge craft beer scene. Europe is experiencing a bit of a craft beer revival. So with that, I mean, we in the US look at Lambic and Gueuze as part of the craft beer scene, part of that old import scene as well. For you guys, has that proliferation of craft beer and its price, I guess, has it helped or hurt you guys in terms of Lambic producers, in terms of sales and just popularity in general?
I think lambic beer, it's a quite costly process to produce lambic beers. And in the past, breweries actually made beer for the local people, the people from the village. So in the past, lambic beer was just the basic beer. And then Pilsner beer got introduced, and then the quality of lambic beers wasn't always that good. So people started drinking more the Pilsner beer. And then step by step, a lot of lambic breweries just had to close down. When the craft beer scene, because I studied in Brussels and I lived in Brussels till 5 years ago. I remember when Delirium Cafe opened up in Brussels, and that was the only kind of craft beer place
When did they
that I
open?
knew. 2004, around 2004.
Really? I thought they were around for a lot longer than that. I did not realize that.
No, 2004.
Hmm.
They opened in the basement. The basement that you know that you see now, it was like 1/3 of that space. So it was very small.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I already was working on the project of Oud Beersel, but I couldn't launch Oud Beersel yet at that time. And so that's the place that I went to drink my beers and to discover all special beers. But in general, we had Belgian craft beers there, and then step by step they introduced some American style beers and everything. But it took a while before Brussels changed, and now it's completely changed for sure. What the impact of that is on Lambic beer, I think people are more appreciative of Lambic beers again in Belgium as well, because Lambic beer was considered like, oh, that's a sour beer, and people knew about the beer, even though they'd never tried the beer. They all said, "Oh, it's a sour beer, so it's not. We don't want to drink this." About the price point, Belgium has always been quite traditional market, and the prices of beers in Belgium, although they have risen over the quite a lot over the last 5 to 10 years, let's say, they're not in general as expensive as when you go to the new craft beer scenes. So a bottle of Gueuse in Belgium is not that expensive neither. So it's, I mean, some people, some breweries, they bring out the beer and they can charge higher prices for a beer that takes like 2 weeks of production
Sure.
than a lambic beer that needs 3 years of production.
Can we?
So
I want to go back really quickly. I'm curious. You talked about, nobody liked Gueuse or nobody liked Lambic because it was sour or acidic and so on and so forth. And we definitely saw that downturn, after the Second World War and through the 50s, 60s, and 70s with all of the sweetened Lambic and stuff. But Lambic and Gueuse is not the only traditionally sour beer to come out of Belgium, right? You have, like Oud Brewing and Flanders Reds. Do you know, and I don't know, did they experience that same kind of loss or downturn in popularity as well?
well, in the past, I mean, there were sour beers that made huge volumes, and now half of their barrel capacity is empty. It's gone up, the production has gone up over the last few years because there's a bit more demand as well. But yeah, there's popularity went down. I think in general, people always tend to go to beers that are a bit more sweet, a bit more easygoing. I mean, any kind of product, not even beers, but also food, like take cheese, for example. If you take a cheese that is very mild, a lot of people will be able to eat the cheese. If you take a blue cheese, not everybody is going to eat the blue cheese. And it's the same with lambic beer. I mean, it's so pronounced, it has special flavors that not everybody is into these kind of flavors.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. It's definitely a flavor issue. I remember the first time I had Lambic, I'm pretty positive I poured most of it down the drain because I thought, oh, this is bad, this is sour. But it wasn't, I mean, it was 13 years ago now that I had my first Lambic, and it takes a little bit. Did you always like Lambic, or was it something that you sort of grew to like or to understand?
Well, my parents were more kind of wine drinkers. So I was raised in a atmosphere, but in the valley. And I used to go with my father to Oud Beersel and other lambic producers to buy bottles, to put them in the basement and serve them to friends of my parents that came over and wanted to drink a beer. So they served them the only local beer we had, traditional Gueuse or traditional Kriek. And as a young guy, you want to do the opposite things of your parents. So they were drinking wine, so I said, I'll drink beer. And the only beer we had was Gueuse and Kriek. So I actually was raised with the flavors of traditional Gueuse and traditional Kriek. When I started studying in Brussels afterwards, I invited my friends and study mates to the bars that served traditional Lambic beer. One of these bars was Le Zageman. It doesn't exist anymore, and that's where we always went because there were not so many bars where you could drink a traditional Gueuze at the time. Nowadays, this has changed. So, yeah, the beer scene has changed quite a lot over all these years. And as well, now that everybody is the nice thing that when I was talking about the competition with Lambic beers in the past, now you can have on the menu of a bar just the category of traditional Lambic beers, and you can put different Gueuses, different creeks on there, and it's a very nice way for breweries to work together as well. We don't have to compete on I want to be in that bar. You don't have to throw anybody from the list. So that's really cool because it helps as relationships to the other brewers. So
Sure.
yeah.
Another one I think is interesting here. It says, do you think it will get harder for blenders to buy wort with brewing seasons likely to get shorter? I know that there's some differing of opinions on whether or not the brewing seasons are really getting shorter, or even how much shorter they'd get, or if it's going to be in effect. But I think we can all sort of see that it is getting warmer, and the temperatures do have an effect on Lambic and brewing seasons and cooling temperatures and in the barrels over the years. Have you experienced anything like that, or do you think it's going to get more difficult?
Look, we installed in 2011 a cooling system in all our barrel rooms. Not because I was worried about climate change at that time, but that was for me the kind of insurance. Because if you age beer on wooden barrels and you expose it to oxygen, it becomes more sour. And if it's warm temperature, then it's becoming even more sour. So, and Lambic beer actually, because we were talking about other styles of soured beers, but Lambic beer is not intentionally a soured beer. Because if you look at Lambic breweries, all the barrels in Lambic breweries, they're laying horizontal. Whereas the barrels in other breweries that make intentionally soured beer, the barrels are standing up because they want to produce acetic acidity. We want to avoid as much as possible the acidic acidity. That's why the barrels in the Lambic breweries are laying down. So the acidity is coming mainly from the acidification phase that we have in the Lambic beer. And whereas other producers, they just put their finished beer on wooden barrels to sour the beer. So it's a complete other way of thinking. For us, it's just nature doing this in one of the 4 phases of fermentation.
Sure.
Yeah, so.
I suppose you're well qualified to speak about this. Can you speak briefly about the correct or traditional method of pouring a Gueuze? As we both pour our last glasses here.
Yeah. So, do I have a Gueuze here? Okay.
Take the question down so people can see it, so it's not covering your bottle. But we're going to talk about how to pour a Gueuze here.
Yeah. So, our bottles are standing up. That means that the yeast is here on the bottom of the bottle. In Belgium, traditionally, we serve our Gueuze without yeast. There are some people that like to have the yeast, but we always taste the Gueuze initially without the yeast. It's a very pure beer. When I drink a top fermenting Belgian beer, I prefer to add the yeast to this because it mellows down the beer and it makes it as a whole. Whereas with Lambic beer, I always prefer to have the beer without the yeast. Now, in the past, there were apparently some breweries as well. They had kind of some microorganisms in their beer that for people that had problems with their stomach or intestines, they were more sensitive to these microorganisms and they had to go to the loo a bit more often. So as well, that's one of the reasons why lambic beer in the past was served without the yeast. But that tradition still continues, even though there are none of these microorganisms left in lambic beers now. But that's one of the reasons I mentioned that lambic beer has always been served without, but as well for the flavor. So I'll open the bottle of Goes and then I'll explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing this. We're not popping up like champagne either, so we're just actually opening up the bottle. We're not popping up the cork in general. So we take a dry glass. I'm at home, so my glass might not be washed in the best conditions. But normally you have to take a washing product that doesn't drop your foam, the head of your beer, and there shouldn't be any calcium in the glass, in the water neither. But so you take a dry glass, dry it with a synthetic towel. Why a dry glass? Because we're going to pour the beer in the glass. But lambic beer in general has a very light or negative foam stability, let's say. So the foam on the head of lambic beer is dropping down faster than on other types of beers. And so we want to avoid that the head is dropping down very fast. So in order to do this, if we put the foam in contact with a wet glass, the foam is getting diluted, so it's dropping down faster. The same when we pour, we're actually going to wetten the glass first with beer, because we want that there's beer on the glass before we have the head of the beer on the glass. Why? Because the head is then attached to the beer that is already attached to the glass. So there is less resistance of the head to the glass, because the glass is another material, it gives resistance, and so we take part of that resistance away. That's why we turn the glass to wetten it.
Huh.
It's not just as a show, it has a function.
Interesting. I did not know some of that. That's good.
Cheers.
Cheers. Let's see.
No, I have 2 glasses.
That's okay. There's a question on here that's actually 2 parts. It was too long to type into one box, so I'm going to put up the first part. We've only got about 10 more minutes, so this is getting kind of short here. The one question is, so it starts, we recently did a Haral blind tasting. 2/3 had Bone and Oud Beersel mixed up. What are the differences in brewing and barrels and blending?
I cannot answer this. I do not know Bone's production. I don't know their recipe. When Oud Beersel closed down, before closure of Oud Beersel, 50% of the wort of Oud Beersel was produced in the old brew house of Oud Beersel, and 50% of the wort was already produced at Bone, but according to the recipe of Oud Beersel. So when I started up with Oud Beersel, I started as a hobby with Oud Beersel. I kept my job in telecommunication, so I had to choose between investing in wooden barrels and the building and the capacity of the lambic on the wooden barrels, or a brew house. But Oud Beersel was doing 250 hectoliters at that time, and investing in a brew house for 250 hectoliters as a hobby, I prefer to invest in the wooden barrels. Now we have our own wooden barrels, so the wort, when I started working with Bone, we started producing the same wort actually that was brewed in the past for Oud Beersel. We use our own barrels. We bought some of the barrels from Bone. We had some of the barrels that were originally from Oud Beersel, and then we bought a lot of other barrels from all over, mainly from Italy. We have a lot of footers from France, but then all the recent footers are coming from Italy. So our barrels are in general different. The only barrels that we bought from Bone that have had Bone beer on there were some of the old pipes, but these old pipes they've been circulating from brewery to another brewery in the past, so they have a lot of history.
Sure.
They've most of the time have been used for 2-3 breweries before they arrived at Oud Beersel. Yeah, and for the rest, I mean, everybody does what they do. It's like there's no big difference, but the same difference goes between if it's Bone Oud Beersel or Oud Beersel and any
Sure.
other brewery. I mean,
Let's do a quick question here. You talked a little bit about how you used to live in Brussels and you used to drink Lambic or Goose at Delirium Cafe. If you're in Brussels now, where do you like to go when you're in Brussels?
well, it's hard for me to go out of the brewery. I still like to go to Delirium Cafe just because I know the people there. I never go there in the evening because that's crazy. When I like bars like Goudblommen in Papier, for example, that used to be one of my favorite bars as well.
Yeah.
I like bars like Bison. Don't know if you've ever been to the Bison. So the Bison, the Monk, but these kind of bars near Saint Catherine in Brussels, I like to go.
What
But okay, I don't have a
what about Pushmelkelder?
Bushnell de Kelder. I go there. I used to go there once in a while, but let's say if I go once a year to Brussels to bars now,
Yeah.
that's about it. That's as much as time that I have to go out of the brewery and stay away from the kids and everything.
What about
I think I go more to bars outside of Beersel. I go more to bars outside of Belgium than in Brussels.
I was going to ask too. I think, and we're working on a new section on the website right now with a Belgian that we're working with now about the importance of the cafe, the Lambic cafes out in the Zenne Valley and the Pajottenland, not just for Lambic, but just for these communal spaces to gather for these small villages, these village bars, these village cafes, and I think a lot of that gets lost. With people who go and visit Brussels as their one big trip to go and do all the Lambic things in Brussels and the surrounding area. But what are some things that people are maybe missing in outside of Brussels? Where do you go? Where do you suggest going if we're outside of Brussels?
But in the area of Brussels,
Yeah.
you mean? Well, there are, of course, these old bars around, but I mean, when I see the feeds from people going outside of Brussels, it's all going to the same breweries. It's like, oh, we go to that brewery and then we take the train back, or we go there and that's it. And it's always a closed circuit. We go to that bar on that day, and we go to that brewery on that day, and that's it. I think people should discover as well what Lambic is about, because it's not only about Brussels there. You have the whole region of Seine Valley, Pajottenland, and Brussels. And there's one producer in Brussels, and then half is probably in Seine Valley, and half is in Pajottenland. And I think the region on itself is very nice. And you have local bars everywhere. Of course, you don't have the old bars that are falling apart with the old woman behind the counter that is 90 years old. I mean, these things, they start to fade away.
Those are the best bars, though.
Yeah, but I mean, less and less of these bars are existing for sure. I mean, like the breweries. I mean, there's space for new generations, and the same goes for the bars.
Sure. I think this is a question we haven't had before. What is the best pairing between Goose and Chinese food?
We've tried all these infused lambics now, and we use a lot of Chinese spices. We've even done tests with red Szechuan pepper, green Szechuan pepper. It's all amazing. Lambic goes with all these spices. It goes with hot spices. It goes with the Chinese teas. It's quite amazing what you can do with Lambic beer, and that's something for the future of Oud Beersel. I mean, we haven't talked about this. We have the beer boxes and we have the infused Lambics, and we are experimenting a lot with the infused lambics, and we're bringing out new things all the time. And I think that's China has so many spices that we use all over the world in our food nowadays. So I mean, for us as well, it's a good. It brings us ideas of what we can do with beer and how we can put lambic beers, bring lambic beers one step further.
I remember tasting the Szechuan infusion when we visited back in January, and I've never tasted anything like that. That and the olive leaf infusion.
Yeah.
The olive leaf infusion is still probably one of my favorite lambics around. It's just
Okay.
I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, we don't want to be mainstream in the ingredients that we use. Of course, we're going to always have some ingredients that one or the other brewer has tried, but lambic beer lends itself to absorb the flavors, and it's really, for me, the best beer to pair food with is lambic beer. If you take a bottle of Goose, you can pair it with everything.
Mm-hmm. If you're drinking a lambic that isn't yours, what's it going to be?
Because normally I most of the time drink mine.
Yeah.
And then I think I drink what is available. I still have bottles left from before I started with the brewery, but it's very rare that I open one of these bottles, not because I don't want to open them, just because I don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I just go to the bar, and then sometimes I just say, okay, let's try this one. It's been a while that I haven't tried the beer. I'm just curious about the evolution.
Is there, okay, so maybe not so much lambic, but if you're not drinking lambic, what are you drinking in terms of beer?
That's a very difficult question as well, because most of the time I'm drinking lambic. So for a lot of people, this is kind of, oh, we are able to drink a lambic beer, because I drink lambic as a daily beer, lambic or Goose. And I look at the past as well, before I started with Oud Beersel, when I could not drink a Goose or a creek, a traditional creek in a bar, I would drink Orval. And nowadays, if we want to switch to another style of beer, we drink Orval.
Yeah.
At home, my wife and I. That's
perfectly...
the only regular beer that we have in our fridge. That's the only beer not in our beer. No, but it's close to the lambic world because it has the Brettanomyces in there. So
sure. Well, Garrett, we are, let's see, 22 seconds away from being cut off here.
Oh,
so
it was great talking to you.
Yeah, it was
I hope everybody enjoyed.
Absolutely.